is not going to agree to a ceasefire. Putin reiterated in the talks with Trump, we're not going to make an agreement to stop fighting so that Ukraine can refit, retrain troops, resupply itself, and get ready to continue the fight. That's not going to happen.
This was Larry Johnson, after Remek Govern, the second CIA analyst I have interviewed on the topic of Ukraine, and he spells out the obvious. Putin will not agree to a ceasefire, at least not one in a way envisioned by Trump and co. But let's be honest, something strange is happening in the so-called free world. We love to brag about our open discourse, right? That the free exchange of ideas is the bedrock of any real democracy. But more and more we are seeing a disturbing contradiction. Voices that challenge the dominant narrative, the ones that push back, that ask inconvenient questions, they are being systematically pushed to the margins, silenced, deplatformed, dismissed as dangerous. Now, if you don't know him yet, he's not exactly a fringe character. Former CIA analyst, worked in counterterrorism at the State Department. A guy who spent decades inside the machine. And yet, now, he's become an outsider. Why? Because he refuses to play by the rules of political consensus. Just recently, March 12, 2025, Larry sat down in Moscow with no other than Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov. Alongside a couple of other commentators, Mario Nawfal and Judge Andrew Napolitano, they conducted an interview that Western outlets wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Think about that. A former US intelligence officer engaging in direct dialogue with the top diplomat of what's officially considered an enemy state. You can almost hear the mainstream media gasping. But here's the thing. Larry wasn't there to parrot propaganda. He was there to listen, to engage, to show the world that dialogue, even with the enemy, matters. And look, that isn't just some naive idealism. Sun Tzu in The Art of War said it already. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. Ignoring the other side doesn't make you righteous. It makes you willfully blind. You don't have to agree with them, but pretending the perspective doesn't exist, that's not strategy, that's self-deception. And in a situation of war, like the one we see right now, this attitude can be suicidal. But there are consequences. Larry was banned from YouTube, gone, no warning, no due process. And sure, no official reason. But we all know why. It's because he dared to say things that upset the balance. He questions Western policy, gave voice to perspectives that don't fit neatly into the scripted moral good-evil binary we are being sold. But this isn't just about Larry. This is a pattern. Independent thinkers, journalists, analysts, dissidents are being purged from digital platforms that were once heralded as democratizing forces. Now they are more like Orwellian corporate ministries of truth, all under the banner of fighting misinformation. But here's the question we need to ask. Who decides what counts as truth? And why are we so comfortable letting unaccountable tech giants hold that power? Larry Johnson's story is a warning. If we keep shutting out dissent, not only do we lose voices like this, we lose our grip on reality. Because a society that can't tolerate uncomfortable conversations isn't free, it's just managed. So, as we talk with Larry today, let's keep that in mind. This isn't about left or right, pro-Russia or pro-West. It's about whether we still believe in open dialogue, in real debate, or whether we've just quickly surrendered to the illusion of consent. Let me just quickly drive home this point one last time. Critical voices, like the ones you hear on this channel, are being actively silenced, shadow banned, and deplatformed. Not in theory, not in some distant future, right now. You might not see it, you might not believe it, but I have the numbers and viewer feedback, like the ones you see now on your screen, to prove it. And I know it now from first-hand experience because my own Twitter account has been permanently suspended. Not for breaking any rules, not for spam, not for bots, but for challenging the wrong narratives and questioning the wrong interests. That's how this game is played today. Step outside the script and they shut you down. Not with a debate, not with facts, but with silence. So if you value sharp, unfiltered analysis, the kind that doesn't play by mainstream rules, do something about it. Subscribe, like and share this video. Every click makes it harder for them to erase these conversations. And if you really want to keep up with my work without censorship, join me on Substack. No algorithmic chokeholds, no hidden filters, just raw, honest analysis. You can also find my podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Amazon. All the links are right below. Think about it. If we don't support independent voices, soon there won't be any left. Larry Johnson, what a pleasure having you. How are you?
Thanks, Thomas. Well, I appreciate the invitation.
I had the pleasure of watching your interview with Lavrov. So
Yeah,
how did that come? How did that come to be? I mean, I was surprised when I initially started to reach out to you. I didn't know. Yeah, so I'm really surprised. How did you manage this?
I received an invite from the Sargrad Institute. Alexander Dugin is connected with it, and Konstantin Malofiev as well. And I had had previous contact with those two gentlemen. They've been following my blog, what I write, and got the invitation to participate along with Judge Napolitano, with Judging Freedom, and Maria Nafal, who is pretty active on Twitter, X. And it was, I've done a lot of interviews on Russia media, Sputnik, Izvestia, TASS, RT, Television One. So it is, I guess, within Russia at least, I'm a known quantity. Not so much anymore in the United States. They've shut out anybody who dares speak in a positive way about Russia is canceled. They don't want to hear it.
Absolutely. I interviewed Professor Glenn Deason yesterday. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah.
But
In fact, I'll be talking with him next Tuesday, I believe.
yeah, it's a great guy. Same issue. Yeah, but it's on both. On whenever you talk about Israel-Palestine and you're not following the mainstream narrative, but also, of course, Ukraine, Russia, the proxy war, deplatformed. My own Twitter account has been suspended a week ago due to authenticity violation, whatever that is. Yeah. But
Yeah.
coming back to you. So I have a little bit of information in front of me here. So you were an analyst and CIA analyst from 1985 to 1989.
Correct.
Then you were deputy director for counterterrorism at the US State Department, founder of Berg and Associates. Maybe you can tell us a little bit what you do with this company.
Well, Berg Associates was set up in 1998. I had Ambassador Morris Busby originally joined us, but the core of the company was myself, Robert Nieves, who'd been chief of international ops with DEA, and John Moynihan, who ran undercover money laundering operations in New York City for DEA. And our company was focused upon helping doing compliance works for banks, brokerages working overseas, conducting financial investigations. And one of the first investigations we did was actually a civil racketeering case that we brought against the tobacco companies, Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, Japan Tobacco, British American Tobacco. The clients were the European Union and the governors of Colombia, and the case involved money laundering. Philip Morris settled that case, I believe it was in 2004, for 15 or 150 billion, I believe, which sounds like a lot of money, but it was basically, I guess it was 1.5 billion. But it sounds like a lot of money, and it is. But that was just a week of cash flow for them. It was easier for them to settle than to fix the problem. So, and along with doing those financial investigations, I also consulted with U.S. military special operations forces scripting terrorism exercises. I did that over 23 years and was involved with, well, around 250 different exercises during that period.
So you don't shy away to tackle larger opponents. I mean, the tobacco industry.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we went after the tobacco industry as well as the liquor industry, Diageo. They're all accepting and trafficking in proceeds from narcotics cartels. They routinely
Incredible.
receive the dirty money. You know, we had in the Philip Morris case, we uncovered evidence that a group of Philip Morris executives would travel to Venezuela near a town called Barquisimeto. They would then they'd rent an armored car. They'd go to the border. They'd pay off the border guards so that they didn't have any record of them entering or leaving, entering Colombia, leaving Venezuela. And then they drove to a town up in northwest or the northeast corner of Colombia called Maicao. And Maicao was a smuggling center for Colombia. It had a significant Muslim presence, ironically, people connected with both Hezbollah in particular. And so a lot of the proceeds that were generated there would wind up back in the pockets of Hezbollah. And these goods would be coming from Panama and then be resold in the black market areas in Colombia. They called them San Andresitos. But anyway, these tobacco executives showed up at the home of a senator from Colombia. And that senator was known in Colombia as the Marlboro Man. In fact, Philip Morris actually went down and filmed an advertisement with him, just like the Marlboro Man. In the United States, they had the Marlboro Man advertisement, a cowboy, rugged cowboy on a horse wearing leather and, smoking a cigarette. Well, this guy, Santander Lopez Sierra, he didn't look anything like the Marlboro Man. He was a roly-poly little fat guy. I called him a watermelon with feet. And nonetheless, they filmed an advertisement with him. You had to feel sorry for the poor horse that had to carry his fat rear end. And he would receive these Philip Morris executives. He'd turn over bags of cash, third-party checks, U.S. postal money orders, which are not supposed to be used outside the United States. And then they took it back across the border and deposited it into Russian banks. And we knew that because the very first case the Berg Associates worked on was the Bank of New York Russian money laundering case. And I've got here within arm's length on CD-ROM all the Russian bank documents from that case. So we were able to track the deposits, ironically, because we had the bank account information.
Incredible story. But that was not the story that spiked my interest in you. So my question as a segue into Russia is, how did you then switch? How did you become interested in politics, from crime to politics?
Well, I've been I've been a commentator, pundit, if you will, on terrorism events and world events since 1994. My first TV appearance was on CNN regarding the capture of Ilyich Ramirez Sanchez, Carlos de Jackal. And CNN was looking for somebody who could talk about terrorism. And I had just left the office of the coordinator for counterterrorism. Our press guy, Joe Reep, had a brother, Pat Reep, and Pat Reep was a booker at CNN. And Pat called his brother Joe and goes, "Hey, I need somebody to come on air and talk about the capture of Carlos the Jackal." And Joe said, "Hey, Larry Johnson just retired, left the office." So they gave me a call. I went on air, started talking. So from that point on, I was a regular commentator on all things regarding terrorist activities, incidents around the world. On the morning of 9/11, shortly after the World Trade Center had been hit twice, the North and South Tower, the NBC Today show called me up and said, "Hey, Katie Couric wants you on air." And I just happened to be at National Airport, Washington Reagan National Airport in D.C., getting ready to fly to LaGuardia in New York when all this was happening. So I was being interviewed by Katie Couric on the Today Show when the plane hit the Pentagon. And then at that point, the interview ended and they jumped on to Jim McLeshevsky to talk about, something that happened at the Pentagon. So, I've been a frequent commentator until I started speaking out against Barack Obama. What was interesting initially in 2000, I was considered a conservative Republican, but in 2003, in the aftermath of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, where I was a critic and speaking out against it as a lie, as based on a fraud, the right-wing folks stopped using me. And then later, when Barack Obama was running for president, and I criticized Obama, all the rest of the left-wing media stopped using me. So, now what's interesting is anybody that has an opinion that favors Russia, or favors the Palestinians, you won't get a spot on any of the television networks in the United States. It's like state-controlled media, propaganda.
This is a really incredible fact because, I mean, when we talk about propaganda, people have a misconception. Propaganda is only in Russia. We don't make propaganda. But
Right.
the opposite is true. Our propaganda is very, very, very sophisticated. So I see already you did make many friends during that period. And now I have in front of me, I saw that you already in 2022 through 2024, you predicted that Ukraine will be defeated.
Yep.
I have a couple of other interviews with the title. Actually, my first interview with Glenn Dissent about 2 years ago was already titled Russia Will Win.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
what made you already in 2022? What led you to the conclusion that Russia will win or Ukraine will lose?
But just math alone. The size of Ukraine at what, 37 million back then, and Russia 130 million. Russia with a larger army, and Russia with an advantage of being able to produce its own weapons. Plus, early on in the special military operation, they crippled Ukraine's air operations. Uh, so, uh, with that, as I looked at that, I realized there's no way Ukraine was going to win this, and that Russia had both the history, the legacy, if you will, from a military standpoint of carrying out these kinds of operations. Now, I didn't fully understand at the time how totally engaged NATO was, that this was a proxy war, that they had specifically trained and equipped the Ukrainian army for this specific mission of destroying Russia. That was the game, and that became apparent over time.
I think when it comes to this discussion point, it's always a good thing to mention the Minsk agreements. I leave it to
Mm-hmm.
you to comment.
Well, the first Minsk one, I think it came about in 2014, and it was accompanied by a ceasefire request by the Ukrainians because they were losing to the militias of Donbass and Donetsk and Luhansk. Then that ceasefire fell apart, and Francois Hollande of France, and Angela Merkel of Germany, they brokered a new Minsk II agreement it was an agreement between the, the governors of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Ukraine, with Putin there to certify on behalf of the folks in the Donbass, and Lukashenko of Belarus also played a role. Well, again, the Ukrainians were losing badly at Debaltseve, and as a result of that, this was buying them some time, and they took the ceasefire as a way to rebuild their army, and then expand the civil war. Now it was really sort of a frozen conflict from 2015 on for the next 7 years until 2022, and then that's when Russia realized that Ukraine was getting ready to launch a major invasion. They were building up their forces. And Russia said, okay, we're going to launch a preemptive strike, and did. And what we've seen now is it's really revolutionized warfare, because this will become known as the drone war. The drone technology fundamentally changed traditional views of the use of everything from artillery to armored personnel vehicles to tanks. It's really like the old Terminator movie has come to pass.
Briefly I would like to come back to the Terminators, because I just saw a clip from Boston Robotics, which is just incredible. But before we do Minsk, so I think the most important thing about the Minsk agreements is, as you already indicated, both President Hollande from Frankreich and Angela Merkel, in retrospect, said that they only signed the Minsk agreements as a means to give Ukraine more time to be armed and then fight Russia. And that brings me to the ceasefire right now. What on earth would motivate Putin, knowing that he cannot trust the West? What on earth would motivate him to agree to this ceasefire that Trump has proposed?
Well, the problem is Putin is not going to agree to a ceasefire. So that's just a foolish hope on the part of Trump. Trump did announce, we got an agreement on a 30-day ceasefire or no attacks on energy infrastructure. Well, that was an easy one for Putin to give a concession on, because Russia has already destroyed like 90% of Ukraine's energy infrastructure. So saying, okay, yeah, we'll put a moratorium on that. Yeah, we don't need to beat that dog anymore. We've already beaten it. So it's nothing more than just a symbolic gesture. But Putin reiterated in the talks with Trump, look, you've got to cut off all military assistance, all intelligence assistance, and that's got to be done before we reach any type of agreement. We're not going to make an agreement to stop fighting so that Ukraine can refit, retrain troops, resupply itself, and get ready to continue the fight. That's not going to happen. Russia's going to continue the fight, pressing forward, destroying the Ukrainian army until it's either going to be an unconditional surrender on the part of Ukraine, or the West will finally come to its senses and say, okay, look, we got to stop this now. Russia's not going to stop. That's the thing the West fails to understand.
There is, from Russian perspective, this is an existential threat. 2 points. I have somewhere behind me, I have the autobiography from William Burns, former US ambassador to Moscow, later CIA director, who says, Ukraine is the reddest of red lines, not only for Putin, but for his whole elite.
Yeah.
And then, of course, what people frequently forget is Russia was invaded by us, the West, 3 times, Napoleon, First and Second World War. How? Well, through Ukraine. It's exactly like you said, this is an existential threat, and the West, we here in the West our politicians don't realize this, which brings me to Europe. How do you make sense of the behavior and responses of our European leaders? I mean, let's start with Mark Rutte, which is now, he was the Dutch Prime Minister, who is now NATO General Secretary.
Yeah, they're delusional. I've described, I'm a dog lover. I've got 2 Rottweilers. There was a time in history when you could refer to Europe as like a Great Dane, a large dog, the powerful dog, influential in the world, the leading industrial power in the world, an economic force to be contended with, a military force that was worth taking into account. Then you get World War I, which started what I'd call the dissolution of the colonial empire that is Europe, or the colonial imperialists. And now today, when you've got the likes of Starmer in the UK, Macron in France, Merz in Germany, they've gone from being a Great Dane to being one of those miniature poodles, those toy poodles only elderly poodle, hardly any teeth, loud, obnoxious barking, but the only thing they're good for is making a mess on the carpet. And then you got to get out the paper towels and clean it up. This, I have never seen anything so divorced from reality as the rhetoric coming out of these people. It's clownish, because they don't have the industrial base to produce the military equipment they say that they need. They don't have the financial resources to produce and pay for that equipment. They don't have the military force. I mean, England, for God's sake, their standing army right now is 72,000. What's the largest football stadium in Netherlands?
I would say 50,000.
Okay, so in England, Manchester United, I think, is well over 100,000. So you could put the entire British Army in Manchester United Stadium, and there'll still be seats available. It's that kind of absurdity. So they're talking about taking on Russia and continuing this war with Ukraine. The Russians have one thing that nobody in the West has: the Oreshnik missile, a hypersonic missile that's an intermediate range ballistic missile that cannot be defended against. If they launch it if the Russians launch it at a target, it'll hit that target and that target will be destroyed. And there's nothing that the Europeans or the United States can do to stop it. Nothing.
I think
So,
Putin, a couple of months ago, he challenged the West for a target anywhere in Ukraine, and he will tell them in advance that he will attack it, and they can try to
yeah,
intercept
yeah,
them. Yeah.
yeah,
European leaders. So I just searched out a couple of notes here. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has warned that Germany must be ready for potential war by 2029, while Bruno Kahl, head of Germany's Federal Intelligence Service, BND, has suggested that a prolonged war in Ukraine could serve, means that's a good thing, to protect Europe from, so has suggested that a prolonged war in Ukraine could serve to protect Europe. How crazy is that?
yeah. That's
This
insane.
open this open acknowledgement that the West is preparing for a long-term conflict, not seeking peace, exposes the deeper agenda. Ukraine is not just defending itself, it's being used as a battlefield to weaken Russia, with European security elites signaling the willingness to let the war drag on for years to serve a broader geopolitical interest. I think this is what we are seeing here, because I have the feeling that our European leaders sleepwalk us all into a military conflict with Russia. And this is something I absolutely cannot understand.
Right. Yeah. No, they have learned no lessons from World War II, because the Russians weren't invading Europe. There was the Nazis. And lo and behold, here in Ukraine, the followers of Stepan Bandera are neo-Nazis. The group called Right Sector, Azov, they all harken back to the tenets of elucidated by one Adolf Hitler. And when the Jews were being slaughtered at Babi Yar, that the ones carrying out those attacks, it wasn't just German soldiers; it was Ukrainians that were followers of Stefan Bandera. So this is a murderous lot.
Hmm.
And yet that's who Europe is protecting and upholding and embracing. Now, Russia's not surprised that Germany once again is talking about wanting to invade Russia. They've done it. They did it in World War One. They did it in World War II, and so now they're back for another helping. The Germans forget that the Russians defeated them in World War II, not the Americans. It was the Russians that did the bulk of the fighting. So
The Russians.
yeah, the Russians paid a terrible price. They 27 million civilians and soldiers died in that war. And the stories from families that I know of one woman that lost 9 sons and a husband.
Yeah.
So
I just want
Yeah,
I
it's
just
just
wanted to say that the Russians lost about 30 million people and won the war.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then they gave up Berlin, for which they have so East Berlin, for which they have sacrificed I don't know how many millions of people without a single shot on the promise, and I invite people to look at the National Security Archive because all the documentation is there, that NATO will not encroach an inch into former Soviet influence sphere. So what do you say to those who say, well, NATO expansion has nothing to do with the Ukraine war?
That's a lie. From starting in as early as 1997, the West started putting together signed agreements with Ukraine to start using Ukraine in joint military exercises. And I scripted those kinds of exercises for 23 years. I know how the process works. And part of it is you always have to have a villain. Who's the enemy? Who's the target? Well, the target was always Russia. And these were, there were couches. Oh, these are defensive exercises. Nonsense. These were offensive. These were planned attacks against Russia. So that was underway, and it really stepped up. Started in 2006, 2007. At least one or two annual military exercises, sometimes on the coasts of Russia, at least in the Black Sea, with U.S. Marines and landing craft landing on beaches in Ukraine, but couching that as defensive. This was the world only needs to step back and ask one question: how many military bases does Russia have outside of Russia? Well, the answer on that is, I think, two. How many military bases does the United States have outside of the United States? The answer is over 700. I've heard as high as 752. Who's
750 confirmed, and I believe 150 unconfirmed. Yeah.
so who's the imperialist? Look in the damn mirror. The United States, there's no other country in the world that has as many military bases scattered around the world, and on top of it, has been killing as many citizens, killing civilians in Afghanistan, killing civilians in Iraq, killing civilians in Syria, killing civilians, facilitating the death of civilians in Gaza, killing civilians in Yemen just this past weekend, killing civilians in Libya. The United States has more than buckets of blood on its hands. And I'm sick of it. I'm appalled by it. We've been fed so many damn lies over the years about, oh, we're fighting to protect democracy and freedom. Nonsense. It's all about gaining economic control, economic superiority, and dominance over it, being able to tell other people what to do. And here's Russia, who has the audacity to say, no, yet you're not going to tell us what to do. You're not, and China, that's one of the reasons it's motivated China and Russia to come together, because
Brezinski,
of the threat that the United States poses.
Brezinski warned in his book, The Great Chessboard, from exactly that situation back in 1997. I think he wrote this book. Yeah, and he thought it was unlikely that Russia and China would cooperate. And now, it's exactly the things that he warned about in this book seem to materialize these
Yeah.
days. So Russia and China are coming together.
Well, let's remember the Nixon opening to China in 1972 was a cynical move. It was designed to create a relationship with China in order to put a wall between China and Russia, and in the process to allow China to develop economically, which it did. I mean, when you look at the phenomenal turnaround in China from a very poor country in the 1970s to, it's an industrial giant now and a leader in many technologies globally. And it's already in the process of supplanting the United States as a major car manufacturer. And U.S. car manufacturers are, I think, frankly, going to find it very difficult to do business overseas.
And AI. They just 2 days ago they came out with the new Manos AI, which supersedes anything that America has anything. So they are making quantum leaps on AI, despite restrictions in semiconductors and whatnot.
Right.
But before we go, China and Russia being driven together, and one of those elements were the attacks on Nord Stream, because now Russia doesn't sell, the gas anymore to Germany or to the rest of Europe. They have signed a 50-year contract with China. But I have spoken about the Nord Stream attacks with various subject matter experts, inclusive a former Boeing engineer, Eric Anderson, who financed 2 private expeditions actually to the attack site underwater. But I would like to get your take on who is behind the Nord Stream attacks.
Oh, the United States. That was a U.S. Intelligence operation, planned and carried out jointly, I believe, with the Norwegians. But it was a U.S. operation, and blaming it on Ukraine, that's nonsense. And the explanation that's come out, I think I was the first one to refer to it as they're trying to claim that Gilligan and the Skipper, there used to be a TV show in the United States called Gilligan's Island, and it was about this boat captain and his goofy assistant sailor. They took out a group of people to do a tour in the waters off of Florida, and they got shipwrecked and lost, and it was a comedy. Well, they're trying to pretend that this was a comedy. This was not a comedy. This was a deliberate attack planned and carried out by the U.S. intelligence community as a covert action in order to cut off Germany from this cheap flow of gas. And boy, are you familiar with the term prison bitch? The term references someone who goes to prison and immediately is forced to serve it becomes basically a prostitute, or is used as a sex tool by other inmates. Well, frankly, that's what Germany has become as far as the United States is concerned. We can do what we want to Germany, and they say they have to take it. They have to accept our abuse.
There was an interview with Joe Biden, and the then German Chancellor Scholz was standing next to him.
Right.
And a Reuters journalist had asked the president about Nord Stream, and that was prior to the Russian invasion into Ukraine. And the president said, "We will stop it." And the journalist was so puzzled that she says, "But Mr. President, this is a Russian-German project. How are you going to do that?" And he said, "I promise you," and I quote, "I promise you, we will do it," or we will something like that.
Yeah.
And then there's consecutive other members of his administration who voiced the same thing. So from your perspective, a NATO member, the US, no, we should say if a NATO member like the US attacks the critical infrastructure of another NATO country, what does that mean? What does this tell us about the relationship?
That the NATO agreement's not worth the paper it's written on. And look, it's not just Nord Stream. Now you got Trump threatening to take Greenland from Denmark, and threatening Denmark, who's also a NATO member. So, the United States, my country, I'm sad to say, we're the big bully. We act like we can do whatever we want. We can take what we want. We can abuse, tell other people to shove off. It's really like the start. It reminds me a little bit of the start of the movie Braveheart with Mel Gibson. When he was out there and he gets married, and then the Lord from the castle comes down, and he gets to have the first night with the new bride, and there's nothing Mel Gibson can do about it. That's Europe. United States is that lord in the castle. Europe are the vassal servants below. And I mean, and you saw Mark Rutte, what a lapdog he is. So beforehand he'd been talking, NATO Ukraine's going to be a part of NATO, absolutely. Then he's sitting there next to Trump. Oh no, yeah, there's no way NATO is ever going to let Ukraine in. A full, complete reversal. And the guy's got no shame, no embarrassment. You know, so that's why I say Europe has become a joke. Yeah, a malevolent joke, able to inflict some harm here and there, but no longer major players that anybody has to pay attention to. And I'm sorry to, if I've offended people in Europe, I'm sorry about that. But, you know, you folks need to stand up, learn to stand up for yourselves and push back against the United States. Instead, you're bending over the log.
Noam Chomsky told me already about 2 years ago that either Europe will get its independence from the US, or it will go down with the US.
Yeah, well, I think you're going down. I think
And
there's no sign. What part of the problem is how fractured the political bodies are in Europe, and we're a little bit that way here in the United States, but not as bad. But the recent election in Germany, they're going, oh boy, the AfD, the alternative for Deutschland, that they got 20% of the vote. I'm going, yeah, that's 20% of the vote. That doesn't control anything. And the rest of the big vote getters were, nobody was above 40%. So what you've got is minority parties that are ideologically miles of kilometers apart and with no chance of reconciling. And those parties are not coming together in any way. And you see that in Germany, you see that in France, you see that in the United Kingdom. I mean, the Tories in the last election, yeah, they got an overwhelming majority, but there were some warning signs beneath, and now the opinion polls have completely turned against the Labour Party. And so again, you've got a fractured society in the UK. Well, without any kind of political consensus, you're going to be weakened within, and you're not going to be able to come up with any kind of coherent policy, particularly on the defense side of the house.
which is in the interest of the US, because the first General Secretary of the NATO already said the aim of NATO is to keep America in, Russia out, and Germany down. And that's exactly what we are seeing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is, in American football, we have a position called the lineman. He's up front, he blocks. And they had this one particular lineman when he retired. He was known in his football career as a guy who started fights. So he'd be on the line and he'd say to the opposing player, "Hey, did you hear what this guy here said about your mother?" And would provoke fights. And frankly, that's almost what the United States has become. We've become like that football player provoking fights within the European Union. And candidly, even without the United States provoking it, you've got no unity. You have Hungary, Slovakia, sort of on one side of it, Austria as well. You've got Maloney in Italy sort of in the middle. You've got Macron and Stammer, the France and the UK trying to compete to say, oh, no, we're the boss. Stammer, I'm the boss. And Macron, no, I'm the boss. And, back and forth. Merz, saying, I guess he thinks he's the reincarnation of Hermann Goering. He's going to decouple the debt from military defense spending and is all good to go with trying to send missiles to Ukraine that will certainly make Germany a target for Russia. I mean, it's insanity. And then you got the EU directly meddling, interfering in Romania, preventing the Romanian people from choosing their own leader and imposing it's an authoritarian mob from the outside.
I think you have to clarify this for people who do not know. They simply canceled an election.
Yeah.
They said, no, we don't like the result, cancelled. In
Yeah,
retrospect. I mean,
yeah.
this is really tough.
And
Yeah.
then what he became after canceling, what's his name, Georgescu, that after
Which is
cancel.
the what is it, the son or the grandson from the former dictator Ceausescu? Yes.
Okay, so after canceling him from his first election, and he became more popular. And then the EU intervened with Romanian authorities and they banned him completely from being able to run.
Hmm.
And they want to call themselves a democracy.
Hmm.
The
Talking
hypocrisy is staggering.
about election interference in that context, Kiev, Victoria Nuland, fuck the EU, pardon my French,
Yeah, yeah,
please.
yeah. Or your English. It was very good English. Yeah, I mean
So the,
it's been the
the,
meddling
the
has been
people
from the West.
there are people who absolutely, and I can see even in some of the comments on my own YouTube channel, they completely deny the fact that there was an active putsch in Kiev in 2014 that actually sparked this whole drama that we're seeing today.
Yeah, yeah. Um, part of it, I guess, is uh, they're trying to keep control of Romania because Romania is the site for what's going to be the largest NATO base, U.S. military base in the region, much larger than anything in Germany or Poland. So this is Romania becomes a key player because they're going to use it as a platform from which to attack Russia. That's what's going on.
If we talk about self-determination, also in the context of Ukraine, because I have heard many people say any country, Ukraine, Romania, whatever, should have the right of self-determination. And whilst in theory, that's of course a very noble notion, if we look historically how the US has observed the self-determination of other countries, maybe you can give us a couple of examples where America has uh, not even talking about the Monroe Doctrine, yeah, but where the US has not adhered to this concept of self-determination. I mean, the
Oh,
list is long.
you mean like Guatemala, the overthrow of Jacobo Arbenz in what 53, 54, Mossadegh, Iran, 1954, Vietnam, successive people overthrown, uh, Muammar Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, Manuel Noriega. The list goes on. Bashar al-Assad, the latest victim. So
This is a really really interesting story here in Syria, where we have a former. I mean, if you would write a novel and you write it in, it would be so crass that it's unbelievable.
yeah,
Yeah.
let's say get
So
out of here.
you have a former Al Qaeda and ISIS leader which has been trained by an American PR company how to speak, how to dress, how to cut his beard, and is now represented as a moderate.
Yeah,
Whilst right now we have massacres going on in Syria, and again, Europeans, I don't know, the Americans, are still supporting this regime. I
yeah.
mean, this is just too crazy to fathom.
Well, that's why people like the Russians and the Chinese, don't believe anything out of the West. Our hypocrisy is so blatant, and we have no shame. We openly and have regularly supported terrorists and have engaged in terrorism, but we don't call it that. We call it defending freedom. But we're killing women and children right now in Yemen. So the United States is directly engaged in terrorist attacks.
Mm. So I play it one more time. So if someone says, look, we should give, let's say, Romania or Ukraine set the free choice of self-determination, they can join whatever alliance or whatever they want. How do you counter this argument?
Well, I counter the argument by um, what is their intent? In other words, uh, neighboring countries always get a say. A country that's worried about its preservation, in particular, in this case, Russia, it's not without foundation for Russia to express concern over the fact that what has been going on in Ukraine has been foreign money, foreign interference, that the people if it was a genuine election of the people, that'd be one thing, but that's not what's been going on. It has been foreign interference funded by the West, billions of dollars coming from USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, all with the intent of destroying Russia. So, that it's sort of a red herring. It's tossed up there to pretend that Russia is an authoritarian state. It's not, and the suppression of free speech that's going on throughout Europe. Europe needs to look in the mirror before it goes out and recognize Europe lives in a glass house and it shouldn't be throwing stones at others.
JD Vance was in Munich, what was it, a month ago, where he
Yeah.
had this, I don't even know the word for it. He put a speech out there, let's just say, which raised a neighbor or two in Europe, criticize him, the lack of free speech in Europe, and he was right,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But that was just a little bit before my Twitter account was suspended. Yeah, so I find it, it's a bit an irony. Here comes an American preaching about free speech, and at the same time, the largest American social media platforms are extremely, how shall I say this, censor
Yeah. Yeah.
anything that goes against the mainstream narrative. So it's again, who sits in the glass house?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's like I said, the hypocrisy. It stinks to high heaven. It's just and there's no excuse for it. But I had my YouTube channel canceled for alleged hate speech, but they wouldn't identify what the hate speech was.
Yeah.
So, that's.
Did you get it reinstated?
No,
Did you get
no,
it reinstated?
no.
What did you do? What did you do?
So someone else has set up a channel that I appear on, and so I go through a cutout now. So it's not me directly, but it's
Unbelievable.
yeah. But I'm out appearing on a variety of channels around the internet. That's for sure.
You just mentioned USAID. And here I was frankly surprised that Trump attacked it. So in first instance, I thought maybe Trump doesn't know what USAID actually did and does. No, I don't know if they still do it, but they have a history, a proven track record of overthrowing government. Well, how shall I say this? At least of participating in the overthrow of foreign governments.
Right, right.
So basically, from a geostrategic perspective, I was really surprised that Trump goes after them so rigorously. But what's behind this?
I don't know. I think Trump finally, over the course of the last 4 years, sat and realized how this cabal, this deep state in the United States, was integrated with this international blob and working to subvert other governments and subvert him. What's ironic is when you look at the budget for USAID, it almost tripled under Donald Trump. And
now or in the first? Sorry, in the first
in the first, yeah, in his first administration, it got up to something like $14 billion, 17 billion under Barack Obama, and then it shot up to 42 billion under Trump. So I don't think he was aware of it at the time.
Yeah, but now he's aware. So
yeah.
Well, again, you answered it already. You also don't know. But so I was puzzled. The only explanation I have is that he didn't realize what they actually did in the background. This is, of course, not propagated in the front. Hey, we are overthrowing governments, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. So,
yeah. Coming back to Europe one last time. How likely, as an analyst, how likely do you think it is that what the Germans here said that around 2029 there will be a European conflict now that the US pulls out, as they did in Afghanistan, as they did in Vietnam, and the images were strikingly similar with the helicopters on the roofs with like people trying to get the last helicopter.
Sure.
So now that the US is pulling out of Ukraine, so how likely do you think we have a European war between some or all European states and Russia?
Highly unlikely. Europe will be too busy trying to save itself economically that it won't have time to be engaged with costly military activities. Plus, Russia is not going to disarm. Russia is going to continue arming itself and building up its military, and Europe, frankly, can't match that. They don't have the culture to match it. It's not like the average 18, 19-year-old teenager is going, man, I can't wait to join the military. The combination of the transgender movement and all these different activities, they're too distracted to worry about becoming warriors. So that'll be one of the things that saves Russia.
And the financial aspect. I mean, they are trying now to get 800 billion from private funds to fund this war
Right, right.
or the rearmament.
Yeah, well, the ideal for the United States is that the Europeans have to buy all of their military equipment from the United States. And
And energy.
yeah,
And the energy.
and
Yes, four
energy as
times the
well.
price.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So right now, uh, they are they're suffering greatly in Germany, in the UK economically, and there's no turnaround on the horizon. If anything, it's going to get worse. So,
The economic situation is getting worse, dramatically so. I hear politicians talk about a wartime economy and the deindustrialization of Germany
yeah,
because large companies are moving out because they can't afford the energy prices anymore.
yeah.
So that will have a massive influence on the population, and as a consequence, the right-wing parties will get stronger and stronger. And I believe here's the true danger here.
Well, yeah, again, it depends. What do we mean by right-wing parties? See, that's where, I think a lot of um, language is misused to, characterize. If somebody says, hey, look, we need to stop this unfettered immigration into our country, and then they get accused of being a right winger as opposed to, hey, we're going to suppress free speech. Well, wait a second. That's what the governments are already doing. Does that make them right wing or left wing? Uh, we're locking up political opponents. That's always the threat that they associate with right wingers, except that's what they're doing in the UK. That's what they're doing in Germany. That's what they're doing in France. So, like I said, this whole anti right wing thing is just, I think it's a red herring, something to distract.
Mm. You're absolutely right. Maybe I should have been more specific. I'm aiming more at direction fascism, authoritarian regimes. Also, Trump is a fan of Putin for a number of reasons. Uh, we have here in the Netherlands, we have a really right-wing party. Having had the biggest win since I don't know when. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's spreading even in Sweden. Such a so this is what I mean. There's the danger. Autocratic societies who do not just imprison, political opponents, but press anyone who's speaking out, someone blogging, talking about something. Yeah,
But
these
that's
kind of
but
things.
that's what's going on right now.
Exactly,
That's going on in the United States. That's going on throughout Europe. So that's why I
exactly.
say
But
that what's the going to bring an alternative? Well, maybe that. Oh, if you bring in somebody that says, "Hey, we're going to dismantle this and stop this," then all of a sudden they get accused of being the authoritarians or the fascists when they in fact are in the process of dismantling the fascists. That's part of what Trump has been doing right now. Now, I'm no, I've been a strong critic of Trump, particularly with what he's intending to do with Iran. He's going to go to war with Iran. It's going to be a disaster.
you see,
Oh yeah, yes.
but then I mean, this is then Israel or Netanyahu pulling the strings here because there is
Right.
no self-interest whatsoever for the US to go to war with Iran.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Hey, listen, I've got another appointment coming up here, and going to have to wrap this up. I'm sorry.
No problem at all. I'm grateful for the time you have given me. Thanks a lot. It was my pleasure talking to you, Larry.
Hey, thank you, Thomas. I'm always happy
Thank
to
you.
come back.
I take your word for it.
Yes.
Okay. If you made it that far, congratulations! You are ahead of the pack. If this video resonated with you in any kind of form, don't just scroll away. Hit like, drop a comment, share it with someone who really needs to see it, and most importantly, subscribe. It sounds like a small thing, and honestly, it probably is a small thing, but this is exactly how we can keep these conversations alive. And if you missed it at the beginning, my Twitter account has been permanently suspended. Not for spam, not for bots, but for being too critical, for questioning the wrong people and interests. And that's the game now. Step too far out of the lines and they erase you. So if you value independent voices, if you want to stay connected, Substack is the place to go. It's free, the link's right below, and I would really love to hear from you. Tell me how it's changing the way you see the world and its people. So thanks for watching, thanks for thinking, and remember, always look beyond the headlines.